All right, everyone, we start talking today about how Biden is kind of boxed into a corner at the moment because an agreement was made between U.S. forces and various groups in Afghanistan for a full troop withdrawal from Afghanistan by the U.S. As of the beginning of May. This was negotiated actually between, ironically enough, Trump, the Taliban, the Afghan government, some other groups. Now, first and foremost, before I get into it, there will be a pinned comment if you're watching this on YouTube with links to 4 other video hosting sites I use. In roughly 1 week, I will start doing 2 Alt-Tech exclusives each day. That is that they will be everywhere except for YouTube in order to try to encourage people to use other sites because, YouTube is still algorithmically demoting creators. Now, this is bad for Biden. This is one of those things that Trump set up before leaving in order to force Biden into a no-win situation, sort of laying little traps and landmines for him very successfully. Of course, he's already had to option the possibility of going back into Syria. That's not popular. I might have to do that with Somalia. I would actually support the proposal because we've been explicitly asked by the governments in the region, and it's not all just fighting militants. Piracy is a big problem there. But as far as Afghanistan goes, this is the longest war other than the Korean War, which most people for some reason forget exists, which we're technically still part of, that we've been involved in. We've been in Afghanistan since we invaded them shortly after 9/11. We've never really had a purpose there. All we've done is massively lower the cost of opioids, actually, which had totally nothing to do with the fact that they stayed wandering around in the poppy fields instead of going off into the mountains where Al-Qaeda actually was operating. Of course, Osama, supposedly, was found in Pakistan. Honk honk, we won't say anything more about Obama's great and glorious raid with the SEAL team there that, by and large, I think have all died. If I remember correctly, there are some possible shenanigans with that story. But YouTube these days doesn't like it if you undermine authority in the government. You're supposed to sit down and shut up and not question the official line of things, because then you're working for Putin. But Biden, the problem is that if he doesn't stick to the agreement, number one, things have to be renegotiated. It'd piss off the Taliban, which can cause reprisal strikes, potentially on U.S. troops. There's no way that the current contingency that's there can really hold its own in any major confrontation. You might end up having to have a troop surge. What it'll do is it'll make Biden look like a war hawk. Now he is. He loves war. He's certainly no peacenik. Trump is the closest we've come to a peacetime president since Carter, arguably since before the World War II era, and did a good job. In foreign diplomacy, Trump gets an A from me. Biden may have to go back on the pledge to leave Afghanistan. That wouldn't be good. The problem is, if he does stick to the pledge, leaves Afghanistan, and then things fall apart, which, by the way, is fairly likely, because the Taliban, do you think they're actually going to stick to the agreement? That was prefaced partially on having to deal with ISIS incursions. And if ISIS says, ooh, well, the U.S. troops are gone, all we've got to do is fight off these fucking warlords here. All they have to do is get a couple of them on board, and then all hell breaks loose. Then Biden takes the blame. Now, here's a prediction. Let's say that Biden leaves Afghanistan. He holds to the agreement that Trump brokered with these groups, which is the right decision. What ends up happening is, if all hell breaks loose, you will see the MSM do a wall of propaganda thing where they're like, well, Trump is the one that wanted to leave. Biden didn't have any choice by that point. It's not really his fault that, people are being slaughtered in the streets. The proper counter to this is different from the one that will be used by people on the right if that happens. Trump fans will say, well, no, Biden made the call, it's not Trump's fault. What you should say is, who fucking cares? We've been in Afghanistan forever. People have been slaughtered the whole time. Whether we're there or not makes very little difference. It doesn't really matter who controls the country. It really doesn't make much of a difference. Look, the government that we've basically installed as a puppet there isn't even all that anyway, and still doesn't fully support us. To the point, again, when you have to make deals with the Taliban, with loosely associated Islamo-fascist tribal warlords off in the hills, in order to maintain even the small semblance of stability in a country, haven't you already lost the engagement? I don't even want to know how many total casualties there have been in the region, both as a result of our actions, Taliban, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the Afghan government, incursions by other groups. It's the graveyard of nations. It's called that for a reason. The United States doesn't even have some of the advantages that other people that have attempted to hold that particular region of land long-term have. Like the Soviets could say, well, they're right basically on our southern border. We've got a land border. We can roll tanks in there. We don't need air support, at least on the surface. They got cut to pieces. The Soviets lost so badly against the Afghans. Now, partially, that was because we decided, Uncle Sam went in and said, okay, we're going to funnel, 1,000 crates of hand grenades, and here's RPGs, and anti-tank missiles, and rockets, and machine guns, and body armor, and we gave them, basically enough surplus. There's so many weapons in the fucking country that most of them are still in use. They didn't even use most of them because there were too many. That helps, but the Soviets got cut to the pieces, and they didn't have to establish a supply line that went across oceans. We do. There aren't really any friendly neighboring nations that we can openly operate from. Pakistan's a fair-weathered friend we have to pay off constantly. We're not going to get anywhere with the Central Asian countries. Iran? Yeah, that would be really fucking funny. It's pointless. There's nothing there to defend. There's no stable government. I'm assuming we're not trying to defend the Taliban's integrity. It's like, oh, you got replaced by ISIS? Well, who cares? That's the norm in that particular region of the world is instability because of the fact that there are trade lines and certain resources, but it's not, you can't create an arable agricultural economy or anything that doesn't relate to drugs. And that comes with its own problems. Those are big trade, and big governments want to get their dicks wet in the opium trade there. There's never going to be stability unless there's a monopolar world, and even then, you're still going to have to deal with bedraggled militants off living in caves and shit like that and moving around nomadically and doing the wear your army down through attrition thing that standard armies like ours are not really that equipped to deal with. I like how they're trying to say, well, Biden's military proposals have more to do with tech than with troops. Okay, drones can't sit on the street corner and police things. This is the logistic problem. When people talk about martial law in the United States, okay, you need actual flesh and blood individuals to do most of the on-the-ground things that you would need to do in such a scenario, unless you're just talking about slaughtering people wholesale. Well, if your goal in Afghanistan is anything other than massacring people, which I'm assuming is not the U.S. foreign policy that Biden is going to propose, then you have to have actual troops there in order to guide things. You're not going to get support from the Taliban. They'll tolerate your presence, but they're not going to fucking help you out. Not unless they're under direct attack by other militant groups. Well, who cares? They're all militants. Who gives a fucking shit? I think that we should leave, but it would have been better never to go to Afghanistan in the first place. We've wasted trillions of dollars and thousands of lives for absolutely nothing. There's been virtually no progress in the region. It's still a fascist regime run by religious zealots. There's still opium flowing like a fucking river from the country. No attempt was made to stop this because there's nothing else to base the economy off of. It's essentially, it's a banana republic based entirely on drugs. And there are still Americans that want to stay in the country. Well, we can't cut and run now. We've got allies over there. Yes, we can, and no, we don't. There are no allies, and Beijing Biden's not our ally either. I mean, the dude's completely out to lunch, not even really the one responsible for his own foreign policy. But keep in mind, if we do leave, there's a good chance things fall apart, and there's a 99.9% chance the MSM somewhat successfully casts that off as somehow Trump failing despite not even being in office at the time. Well, Trump's the one that agreed to this terrible deal. He should have known that the Taliban would renege, and he should have known that the Al-Qaedans would rise up and destroy the government, and now Beijing Biden has to send more troops in. He's not really a warmonger. He loves peace, but he has no choice to defend the Afghan people. It's probably what will end up happening. That's unfortunately the most likely outcome to this scenario. The only other real outcome is we stay there forever. That's about all. Peace out.